Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great start to your week. Tonight is my third installment on the series I've been doing on leaky gut. First installment was about 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago on July 5th, and we were talking about actually what is leaky gut. Last week we were talking about what is leaky brain and the correlation between the two, and we've learned that the gut actually has a much larger impact on the brain than the brain does on the gut. Well, tonight we're talking about things that actually contribute to leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So before I go any further, I want to reiterate that we're not talking about large holes in your colon or small intestine. We're talking about the gradual weakening of the lining of your gut due to inflammation in the body. And this allows very small particles to pass through into the bloodstream and then contribute to all kinds of chronic illnesses that we deal with. If you want to scroll back on my wall and watch the first video on July 5th, you can do that, or go to my YouTube channel and you can pick them up there. So, what are some things that contribute to leaky gut? And when we think about, again, this intestinal permeability and things that injure the gut lining, there are a number of factors that contribute to that. One of the first things I think of is actually an inflammatory diet. This is things like gluten, sugar, dairy, processed foods. And I could probably do segments on all of those things by themselves, and I might do that at some point. But these are all things that contribute or add to inflammation in the body and that ongoing weakening of the gut lining in the intestines. The second thing is medications, specifically antibiotics. Now, I am someone that had multiple sinus infections every year before I started Plexus, and it led to multiple courses of antibiotics every winter into spring, and then antibiotics throughout the year for other things as well. I even was on something called doxycycline years ago for Lyme disease. And here's the interesting thing about antibiotics is that they're used for very specific purposes because they're going to kill off that bacteria. But antibiotics, they do not discriminate. So like when I used doxycycline, it went in and yes, it helped me feel better and it got rid of the Lyme. But when it kills off the bad bacteria, it also kills off all the good bacteria. And scientists have actually done a lot of research on this and have found that, or concluded that, we have colonies of bacteria in our bodies that have been with us since we were born. And through the process of ongoing antibiotic use, a lot of these colonies are killed off and probably will never return. And they are something that should be contributing to our overall wellness and supporting our health and wellness. And when these colonies are killed off, it creates a disruption in the gut microbiome. And this disruption can lead to pathogens, very harmful pathogens in our bodies being allowed to flourish. And in response, our body, it triggers its immune system to go into effect. And this then is going to lead to inflammation because sometimes that trigger doesn't turn off and the body doesn't stop. So it keeps fighting these pathogens. And this leads to inflammation, which is a contributor to the weakening of the gut lining. Another one is long-term use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. If you're not using one, you're probably using more than one, and you might have used one today. If you've never heard of those, so they're called NSAIDs, as we refer to them, but we're talking about things like aspirin and ibuprofen. And I used ibuprofen, oh my gosh, for years and years and years. Also Advil PM at night to go to sleep. But the ibuprofen, I would take 3 at a time, 200 milligrams each, and multiple times a day sometimes, but did that for years, with headaches and joint pain and all kinds of other things. And that's a really cool thing is that I've not had to use any of those in over 3 years. And I was looking through our medicine cabinet the other night for something, and I came across an old bottle of ibuprofen that had been hidden behind something. And it just reminded me of how much I used to use that stuff. And I looked at the expiration date, and it's like well over a year past, and it just had been kind of sitting in there hidden away. But again, haven't used any of the any ibuprofen or anything like that in over 3 years. Another thing is stress. So when our bodies become agitated or distressed, cortisol goes up. And when cortisol increases, it makes the gut, the lining, the junctures in the gut lining larger. And this leads to leaky gut and damages the gut lining over time. The last thing tonight I'm talking about is food sensitivities. And this occurs when the body activates its immune response against certain types of food particles that enter the bloodstream. Things, and actually, when leaky gut develops, the larger food particles like lactose and gluten are allowed to pass through because of this now intestinal permeability, and they go into the bloodstream. And once in, the body then will trigger that immune response, and then again more inflammation in the body. So it's a never-ending cycle. And food sensitivities actually develop when this continues for long periods of time. So I hope that's been helpful. We real quickly, and this was very fast, about 6 minutes. We talked about inflammatory diet. We talked about antibiotics and other medicines. We talked about long-term use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, stress, and food sensitivities. And these are all things that contribute to intestinal permeability, or the weakening of the gut lining, which a lot of us refer to as leaky gut. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll be back again next week with our last installment. Have a good night, everyone.